Lisbon, in the 1700s, died and was reborn in a single day. November 1st, 1755, a morning that began with church bells and ended with a city in ruins. Europe's most catastrophic earthquake would kill tens of thousands in minutes through a triple disaster: earthquake, tsunami, and firestorm. But from the ashes, the Marquês de Pombal would forge something unprecedented: grid pattern modernity imposed on medieval chaos. This is Enlightenment urban planning forced by catastrophe, where medieval gave way to modern instantly, and where tragedy sparked Europe's first scientific disaster response. Pre-1755 Lisbon was a city transformed by gold. When Brazilian mines began producing massive quantities of gold in the 1690s, Portugal's capital became one of Europe's wealthiest cities almost overnight. King João V, reigning from 1706 to 1750, channeled this wealth into an explosion of Baroque architecture that made Lisbon glitter. The churches embodied this golden age most spectacularly. Over 40 parish churches, dozens of convents and monasteries, and countless chapels crowded the hillsides. Inside, Brazilian gold covered everything. Altars dripped with gilding, walls gleamed with azulejo tilework, and carved woodwork shimmered in candlelight. But this wealth sat atop medieval foundations. The city's street plan had barely changed since Moorish times, a labyrinth of narrow alleys, climbing steep hills, some passages so tight that two people could barely pass. Houses built of timber and masonry leaned toward each other across these lanes, blocking sunlight. The lower city, the Baixa, was a dense tangle of merchant quarters, workshops, and warehouses where commerce and chaos mixed freely. The waterfront presented Lisbon's imperial face. The Ribeira Palace stretched along the Tagus for hundreds of meters. The great riverside square was where royal proclamations were made and executions carried out, where merchants negotiated and crowds gathered. Along the river, the Ribeira das Naus shipyards built the vessels that connected Lisbon to Brazil, India, Africa, and the Far East. The sounds of hammering and sawing filled the air 6 days a week. West, along the coast at Belém, the Jerónimos Monastery and the Belém Tower stood as monuments to Portugal's age of discovery. Their Manueline stonework, carved with nautical motifs, celebrating Vasco da Gama's voyages. By 1755, Lisbon held between 200,000 and 275,000 people, making it one of Europe's largest cities. It was a place of extreme contrasts: palaces next to slums, nobles and beggars attending the same churches, immense wealth alongside grinding poverty. The city felt eternal, its power unquestionable, its glory permanent. November 1st was All Saints' Day, the most important religious holiday of the year. By 9:30 that morning, churches across Lisbon overflowed with worshippers. Thousands of candles burned on every altar. The streets were empty, everyone was inside, nobles and commoners kneeling shoulder to shoulder in prayer. At 9:40 a.m., the earth convulsed. The first shock lasted between 3 and 6 minutes. Eyewitnesses disagreed, time becoming elastic in terror. The ground rolled in waves. Stone buildings that had stood for centuries collapsed in seconds. The churches, packed with worshippers and lit by thousands of candles, became death traps, and those who weren't crushed immediately found themselves trapped in darkness under tons of rubble. The Ribeira Palace disintegrated. Centuries of royal archives, priceless paintings, thousands of books, the accumulated cultural wealth of the empire vanished in moments. The Casa de India warehouses collapsed, burying fortunes in diamonds and gold. The new Opera House, inaugurated just 7 months earlier as the finest in Europe, was reduced to rubble. Those who survived the initial quake fled toward the open space of the Terreiro do Paço and the waterfront, believing they'd be safe from falling buildings near the river. It was a fatal mistake. 40 minutes after the earthquake, survivors on the waterfront noticed something strange. The Tagus River was retreating, pulling back to reveal the riverbed, ships settling onto mud and sand. Then they saw it, a wall of water racing toward the city. 3 tsunami waves struck Lisbon, the largest estimated at 12 meters high, traveling at tremendous speed. The waves swept hundreds of meters inland, drowning thousands who had survived the earthquake. When the waters retreated, they dragged victims and wreckage back into the Tagus. But the destruction wasn't finished. Those thousands of All Saints' Day candles, toppled by the earthquake, had fallen onto wooden beams, fabric, and other combustibles. Throughout the ruined city, fires began. Fanned by strong winds and feeding on the timber construction of collapsed buildings, these fires merged into a firestorm that burned for 6 days. The firestorm completed what earthquake and tsunami had begun. Buildings that had survived the shaking burned. Survivors trapped in rubble died in the flames. The fire was so intense that it created its own weather, generating winds that spread the destruction further. Contemporary accounts describe the sky turning black at midday, the air filled with ash, the city glowing red at night. When it ended, between 30,000 and 40,000 people were dead, roughly 15 to 20% of Lisbon's population. The lower city, the Baixa, was almost completely destroyed. Of 40 parish churches, only a handful remained standing. Survivors camped in fields outside the ruined city, terrified of aftershocks that continued for weeks. Amid the chaos emerged one man with a vision, Sebastião José de Carvalho y Melo, later titled Marquês de Pombal. King José I as chief minister, Pombal took control with ruthless efficiency. When asked what should be done, he reportedly replied, "Bury the dead and feed the living." Pombal's response was unprecedented in its systematic approach. He deployed troops to prevent looting and maintain order, organized emergency food distribution, and crucially, sent questionnaires throughout the country, asking detailed questions about the earthquake's effects. This was Europe's first scientific disaster response, an Enlightenment approach to understanding natural catastrophe. But Pombal's greatest legacy was the rebuilding itself. Rather than reconstructing medieval Lisbon's chaotic street plan, he saw opportunity in catastrophe. Working with engineers Manuel da Maia, Eugenio dos Santos, and Carlos Mardel, Pombal designed an entirely new city center. The Baixa would be rebuilt on a rational grid pattern, straight, wide streets intersecting at right angles, a revolutionary departure from medieval urban design. The streets were widened to prevent fire spread and allow troops to move quickly in emergencies. Buildings were standardized to uniform heights and designs, creating visual harmony. Most innovatively, these new buildings incorporated gaiola, cage, construction interior wooden frameworks designed to flex during earthquakes, an early form of seismic engineering. The Terreiro do Paço was transformed and renamed Praça do Comércio Commerce Square, a name reflecting Enlightenment values of trade over royal absolutism. Triumphal arches and symmetrical buildings created an elegant riverside plaza opening to the Tagus. 3 main streets led north from this square into the grid pattern Baixa, each named for the trades that would operate there. Rua do Ouro, Gold Street; Rua da Prata, Silver Street; Rua dos Funkeiros, Drapers Street. The reconstruction took decades, but the core was completed within Pombal's lifetime. Not everyone benefited equally from the rebuilding. Pombal's authoritarian methods crushed opposition. The Jesuits were expelled from Portugal, their considerable properties seized. Aristocratic rivals were imprisoned or executed. But the city that emerged was undeniably functional, healthier, and more resilient than what had been lost. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755 was more than a local disaster. It shook European consciousness. Voltaire wrote about it. Philosophers debated how a benevolent God could permit such suffering, and the event challenged Enlightenment optimism about humanity's place in nature. The earthquake helped birth modern seismology, disaster response planning, and trauma psychology. Today, much of Pombaline Lisbon still stands. Walking through the Baixa's grid streets, dining in the Praça do Comércio, you're experiencing 18th century urban planning, Enlightenment rationality. Lisbon's story is one of resilience through catastrophe, of how disaster can become catalyst for transformation. From the ashes of November 1st, 1755, arose not just a rebuilt city, but a new way of thinking about urban life, disaster response, and humanity's ability to rationally reshape its environment. The Lisbon that died that morning gave birth to the Lisbon that endures today, a city that rebuilt itself with enlightenment and refuses to forget its rebirth.